Welcome to the Champions for Change Introduction to Collective Impact webinar with Tamarack's very own Sylvia Chu, Director of Deepening Community. I'll now turn it over to Sylvia to share an introduction to the collective impact.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all secretly and quietly enjoying your lunch. Happy to be spending a bit of time with you today. As a bit of a warm-up to our meetup in Halifax in just a few short weeks, we wanted to really give folks a chance to go a little bit deeper and get an overview on collective impact, because our Champions for Change workshop is really focused on folks who are backbone leaders. So we don't necessarily there go deep into a general introduction on collective impact, assuming that many of you folks coming will already be familiar. But for those of you who aren't, here we go. So this is just a little more information about our upcoming event in Halifax. I'm so excited to have so many of you coming to join us. We do have a few seats available still, so if you're interested and curious about registering, we'd welcome your inquiries after the webinar. As I said earlier, our Champions for Change workshop really is an advanced learning opportunity for folks who are playing more of a leadership role in the backbone of a collective impact initiative. And our objective with the workshops and the tool sessions and the keynotes is to really help you to strengthen your ability to understand the nuances of collective impact and also begin to build really good connections with folks from across the country and beyond who are doing similar work to your own. So for today's webinar, I'm going to work fairly quickly through giving you a shared understanding of collective impact. And we see this, as I said, as a bit of a foundation of knowledge leading up to our event in Halifax. And I'm hoping that through the presentation and some of the examples that I share, that you will have an opportunity to really think about how you might accelerate your ability to impact your community's agenda using collective impact as a framework. So after doing a bit of context setting, I'm going to give you an overview to the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact. And as Stephanie said, my goal is to wrap us up by 12:40 to leave lots of time for you all to share comments, questions, and also any kind of queries you might have in preparation for our face-to-face meeting in Halifax in a couple of weeks. So for those of you who don't know, here's a bit of a snapshot overview of us at the Tamarack Institute. We really have our eyes set on aligning knowledge and practice and building a connected force of community change leaders across Canada. The circles across the top are the 5 big idea areas, one of which is collective impact. And in addition, one of the strengths of Tamarack, I think, is that we're really focused on helping to facilitate that transition from theory to practice. And we do that through 2 of our practice areas, Vibrant Communities Canada, that is focused on multi-sectoral approaches to poverty reduction, and Deepening Community, which is really looking at how to strengthen neighborhoods and the role of citizens in partnership with organizations and municipalities around making community change. So I'm not sure if we can do this with hand raising, but maybe I'll ask Stephanie to chime in and help me with this. I'm curious about people's knowledge of collective impact coming to the call, because that helps me focus in my comments a bit more in a bit more tailored way. If you are someone who is just getting a taste and an understanding of what collective impact is, could you all raise your hands?
Okay, we have quite a few hands, Sylvia.
Ah, good. Okay. So maybe I will, would you say it's about 1/3, 2/3?
I'm counting about 15 to 20.
Okay, and we have a total of
72.
Okay, so if you're someone who's more in the middle, you've read a couple of articles and you've really started to talk about and think about how collective impact might help you advance your community agenda, please raise your hand.
Quite a few. and a couple people seem to be changing their votes. So So we have about 20 to 25.
Okay, and then I'm going to guess the balance of you, about 25 to 30, but we'll test out my math in a minute, are folks that have been working in this way for a while and are actively working with the 5 conditions, 3 preconditions on an important issue in your community. Raise your hands if that's a few. Pretty seasoned.
22.
Okay, that's good. So we're pretty much an even split. So I am going to go through this quickly, but I invite you to reach out after if you have any outstanding questions. This is a fantastic YouTube clip. I don't know that it's worth having us play it right at this moment. I can try and see what happens because it really does nicely kind of give us a picture of what collective impact is all about. So let's give it a go. Overwhelming. When individual organizations attempt to tackle the most daunting problems, success stories are all too rare. Many innovative approaches have been tried, too few have worked. However, when organizations work together under the right conditions, they can accomplish great things. One particularly effective means of collaboration is collective impact. Using the collective impact approach, a number of complex social challenges have been addressed and some remarkable results have been achieved. Youth incarcerations dropped by 45% in just 3 years, with no change in public safety, improving the lives of thousands of youth. 6,000 public housing residents were placed in new jobs during the recession. More than 1,000 acres were restored and over 280 million pounds of pollution voluntarily reduced to conserve and restore a river. Organizations utilizing a collective impact approach do the following. Agree to a common goal. Agree to track progress in the same way, which allows for continuous improvement. Do what each does best while identifying new ways to work together. Have consistent communication. And finally, have skilled and dedicated resources to support ongoing efforts. The world's toughest challenges aren't going away. In fact, many experts predict they will continue to grow in both number and complexity. Solving these problems requires a range of expertise from a number of diverse organizations. Collective impact is a proven approach, helping organizations work together to move mountains. Well, there you go. This video has been created for us by the Collective Impact Forum, which is a network of practitioners of collective impact that actually spans the globe. And it's a fabulous website and resource for those of you who are looking for specific tools to help you advance your own work. As the video alluded, collective impact is a form of collaboration, but it's a very specific form of collaboration. And the characteristics, I think, that really distinguish collective impact from other forms of collaboration are its emphasis on working across sectors, tackling issues at a large scale, and I think I'm going to say a little bit more about complexity, because I think one of the most important things for all of us to pay attention to as we're learning about collective impact is when does it make sense to use a collective impact approach? And as importantly, when might it not make sense? Collective impact, you know, for all the popularity and curiosity about it, because of its effectiveness, really is about remaining focused on the longer term goal and systems change that you are trying to affect, and not expecting that things are going to go off without a hitch, but more importantly to keep your multi-sector partners all singing from the same songbook as you try things, learn things, and keep adapting. For those of you who aren't familiar with where all of this started, really collective impact came to the fore in 2011 with an article published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review by John Kanya and Mark Kramer of the collective of FSG Social Impact Consultants. And they talk about, or that part of how they identified the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact was that they were hired by philanthropists to do a research piece where the philanthropy network was curious for all the programs that had been invested in over the years, what kind of lasting impact had those investments made. And in undertaking that research, Kanya and Kramer went out and interviewed a number of grantees that were supported by this grantor network, came back and said, you know, almost always the investments that were made had a positive impact on program recipients who were fortunate enough to be able to take advantage of the programs funded by the grantors. But there were a few outlier projects that seemed to have an ability to impact at a far larger scale than just at the individual program participant level. And those outlier projects were the ones that Kanya and Kramer were most curious about. So they set off to go a little bit deeper. And though these outlier projects were quite diverse in nature, the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact that are now widely known were the common patterns and themes that were consistent across these hugely successful efforts. But before we dive into unpacking those, I just want to ground us a little bit in 2 kind of concepts that I think are instrumental in helping you to discern whether collective impact is an approach that makes sense for the change that you're hoping to lead in your communities. The first has to do with collaboration. So, you know, certainly collective impact is a form of collaboration, but not all forms of collaboration are collective impact. What you'll see here on the slide in front of us is a spectrum of options for how different organizations and groups can choose to work together. And right from the far left, acknowledging that there are times when we are actually actively competing with one another. And you'll see as you move along, you can coexist or sometimes communicate and information share. Cooperation tends to be, you know, 2 organizations come together and see that they're serving a number of the same people, so may agree on a common intake process or something like that. Coordination, collaboration, and integration are much more comprehensive approaches for how different organizations and sectors might work together on an issue. And where the red box shows up on this slide is precisely the territory of collective impact. So it is a much more comprehensive commitment to working together across organizations and sectors. I would say another sort of distinguishing feature of collective impact as a form of collaboration is it is very deliberate about engaging across sectors. That's number 1. Number 2, a collective impact effort almost always has a view that transcends programs and also invites the participants to consider opportunities for systems change. And I think the third real distinguishing characteristic of collective impact as a form of collaboration for me is its rigor around the use of data. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the fabulous work of Brenda Zimmerman, and is a co-author of that great book, Getting to Maybe, How the World Has Changed. But she was really instrumental in helping to draw attention to the fact for us that not all problems are the same kind of problem, and that different kinds of problems need different kinds of solutions. Collective impact is, as we've heard already, an approach that is best suited when the issue or opportunity that you're wanting to affect is a complex one. So then the question is, how do you tell? How do you know? So for those of you who aren't as familiar with this, I'm just going to give us a quick recap. So Brenda and her colleagues identified that there are generally three distinct types of problems. The first is a simple problem. So simple problems are problems where we already know the answer, and it's not really up for much debate. A great example that I like to use often around this is hand washing. from a context of reducing the spread of disease. We all know it. We all just have to comply with doing it, and the result will be the same every time. A complicated problem is what's often described as a knowable problem. So this is a kind of problem that has a number of components to it that we all have to tease and figure out. But once we get it done, it tends to be fairly static. And the approach that we use, if we use the same approach time over time, will almost always sort of generate the same predictable kind of outcome. For me, the analogy that works best here is putting on a play. So while each play may look different, right, we know that there are core pieces of a successful play. You know, we need a good cast, we need a great script, we need a director, we need props and sets, we need marketing. And assuming that all of these things get figured out, and some of them may be a little tricky, once we get them nailed down, odds are we're going to get a successful play, and it's repeatable and teachable. Complex problems are unique from the other two because the pieces or the components of the problem are not constant. They're actually dynamic and changing. And the analogy of raising a child or being in a relationship are two fabulous examples, because the reality is, like many of our complex problems, the component pieces that are contributing to a complex issue aren't static themselves either, and can actually vary community to community, which is one of the reasons why addressing these kinds of problems can be particularly challenging for us. So let's just go a little bit deeper. Some of the characteristics that define complex problems is that, first of all, they're hard to frame. So, for example, a good example of a complex problem would be poverty. So within the realm of poverty, there are so many root issues that contribute to that. It's hard to know exactly where to draw a boundary around it. Diverse stakeholders are affected. As I said, the component pieces are dynamic, and success may vary. Definitions of success may vary in a complex problem. So complex problems are the realm where collective impact works best. This next slide comes from the White House Council on Community Solutions, who embraced a collective impact approach when they were focused on the issue of opportunity youth in the U.S. And I like these 5 questions because what they do is lay out for anyone considering a collective impact effort what you're actually agreeing to when you're embracing a commitment to work in this way. First of all, you're saying you're going to make a big, significant impact on a community-wide issue. You know, 3 to 5 years is one of the things that they highlight. It's a long-term commitment. This is not a short-term programmatic fix. However, there are programs that are often part of a collective impact effort, and we'll talk about that a bit more. The third question, I think, is a really critical one. So it's recognizing we're not just going to work within our own sector. We're actually going to deliberately go outside the bounds of our sector and invite people who wouldn't normally be engaged in this issue to join us and help us look at it differently. And using measurable data we've spoken about, but the other piece, and I think this is probably in my experience the most critical, that you need to have the voice of the community as active partners and participants for an effective collective impact effort, because they bring up unique knowledge that helps you tailor an approach to the particular community where you are based. In our experience at Tamarack, if you or your group find yourself unable to say yes to at least 3 of these 5 questions, that's probably a pretty good indicator that A, collective impact isn't the right approach for you, or B, you may have some more pre-work or groundwork to do in anticipation of moving toward a collective impact approach. So the 3 preconditions of collective impact that were identified by Kanya and Kramer were influential champions, urgency of the issue, and adequate resources. So what this is saying is you have to be able to know that you have some influential people within your community who care about this issue and are willing to put their own personal credibility knowledge, and resources to work in helping to address it. Urgency of the issue really speaks to how does your issue show up in the hearts and minds of people within your community. You know, just because you're living and breathing this issue every day doesn't mean that the average member of the public is. So one of the groundwork pieces prior to engaging in a collective impact effort is doing some due diligence to find out how is your issue known or seen generally, because it might suggest that you need to do some profile raising and or data collection to begin to tell the story in the public in such a way that it begins to raise people's attention and curiosity about what it is you're trying to do. Adequate resources is the third, and certainly funding is in that bucket of what we would consider important around a collective impact approach. And really thrilled that recently the Ontario Trillium Foundation has launched a collective impact grant stream here, which is actually allocating and changing how they allocate in ways that fund these kinds of comprehensive collective impact efforts. But I will say that adequate resources also goes way beyond the dollars. It is people power, it's in-kind resources, it's meeting space, it's seconded staff. So it's an invitation for all of us considering collective impact to really think outside the box around how we resource the effort that we're about to go on. So here are the 5 conditions of collective impact. And I'm not going to go over this slide deeply because I know that in the subsequent slides we're going to kind of unpack each one. So the first is the common agenda. So what the common agenda is a statement across the multitude of partners engaged around the challenge that you're attempting to work on together. But it's bigger than that as well. It's also acknowledging that the only way you think you're going to make the kind of impact you're hoping to is by working together, and that you have agreed upon beyond your common agenda across the partnership a shared set of goals and plans for how you're going to achieve the common agenda, and some agreements and principles for how you're going to work together. Shared measurement is the second of the 5 conditions of collective impact. And I think what this is asking us to do is to identify, once we've chosen our common agenda, what are the measures that make sense to the various partners around our table that we agree to track over time so we'll know how we're doing. And whether some of the ways in which we're hoping to affect change are working and or not working. But as importantly, the shared measurement piece can be, helpful in inviting us to sometimes define and clarify our shared agenda. So data can help inform the creation of the shared agenda as well. And then finally, beyond actually identifying the measures, a good collective impact effort also begins to define the systems and processes that together you're going to agree on to both periodically reflect on what impact your effort is having in the data and what the changes in data mean. So here's a fabulous example from Halton in Ontario. So the Halton Our Kids Network is a fantastic collaborative that's been in operation for well over a decade. And when they started, their focus was primarily on kids 0 to 6, but over time, as they've matured, they've broadened their scope to children 0 to 18. And you can see on the very far right, the collaborative partners of the Halton Our Kids Network all share the same common commitment to have an impact in their community so that all the children of that region thrive. And then they ask themselves, you know, thinking about the concept of shared measurement, how would we know that all the children of our community are thriving? And you'll see they've defined what they call the Halton 7 as the 7 primary measures that they use to assess whether or not the children of their region are thriving. And then if you back up, they have identified what the data points are that they are going to follow across their different organizations to help inform how the community is doing on the Halton 7. And then as needed, they design programs and services together with other community partners to address gaps and or to seize opportunities. And what you'll see here, and if you haven't looked at it, I'd really encourage you to check it out afterwards. The link's at the bottom. Over time, the Our Kids Network has actually created a shared data portal, which is accessible to both organizations and parents and children themselves. So at any one time, you can go online and see how the community is doing against the Halton 7. So the third of the conditions of collective impact is mutually reinforcing activities. So, you know, one of the things that is really interesting about collective impact is that collective impact efforts are not in and of themselves organizations. They're collaboratives across many organizations and various partners. And so what the collective impact approach is inviting each participant in a collective impact effort to do is to look at the programs and services that they deliver, the constituents that they serve, and put their heads up and then say, but even while we're all working away at our programs and working with our clients, we recognize that there are issues and opportunities that we are just strapped and are not addressing. And it's when we come together in a collective impact effort and begin to map out what each one of us is individually doing, that together we begin to identify opportunities for greater synergy, seeing places where there's overlap, identifying places where there's gap, and then beginning to share resources and thinking so that we can begin to innovate and try new things. So here's an example, because it feels like, you know, all of these 5 conditions can feel like big chunks, but it's sometimes helpful to see how they braid all together. The example I want to share is called Erie Together. It really got started shortly after the downturn in 2008, when the then mayor of Erie, Pennsylvania, and his county counterpart were saddened to hear that data was showing that they had the highest poverty levels of any community in the state of Pennsylvania. And this is not how they wanted to be known. So what they did was they went on a bit of a learning journey and looked at other innovative approaches for how issues of poverty were addressed. They paid visits to a couple of these opportunities and then began to convene people together to explore what might be possible in Erie. And they really focused that effort. Over time, they teased out. There were 3 primary areas that they wanted to ensure that they achieved outcomes around, and you'll see those below: the learn, the work, and the thrive. But what I really love about the Erie Together story is when they went broadly public with their initiative, it was how they described it. It was beautiful because what they did was they talked about what Erie Together was by saying what it wasn't. So they began by saying, we are not a social service agency. We are not a social service program. We are a county-wide civic movement that's focused on preventing and reducing poverty and alleviating prosperity. So what that did very publicly when they shouted it out was let everyone know that we all have a stake in addressing this issue. So now I'm going to invite you to go deeper. So imagine you get inspired and you're someone who's living in Erie, Pennsylvania. And in fact, because you have some expertise in early childhood education, you're invited and get engaged at the Learn table. Okay? So what they did was they created county-wide action teams around each one of those 3 desired outcomes. So there's the learn, there's the work, which was really focused on workforce and economic development, and thrive was really addressing issues of immediate poverty. So say we're all zeroed in around the learn table. Imagine, you know, we have to spend a lot of time across these various perspectives who all share a common passion around learning to begin to chart out and draw a picture of what our understanding is about what it's going to take to see more of the children in our community become successful adults. And you'll see here some of the key milestones that together they identified as being important from their experience. But now this is where it becomes really challenging. As you can imagine, that Learn table then started to have some pretty tough debates between and amongst themselves around, within the whole scope of the Learn agenda, where would they start? what kinds of initiatives or projects did they want to work on together to enable them to achieve their desired outcome in the learn space. And, you know, there was lots of data that could suggest, for example, that they needed to focus on reducing teen pregnancy because there was a high rate of teen pregnancy in Erie, and it was affecting graduation rates of both young men and women. You know, then there was another whole group who was looking at, you know, the research on science, technology, engineering, and math, and saying, you know, these are the skills we really need to cultivate. So back and forth, the group went trying to figure out what made the most sense for them and how would they start to take action together. And as you can see, they ultimately landed on third grade reading. Now, you know, the reality is, and this is a challenge, right? Any one of those blue arrows on that screen would have been a great place to start and probably would have helped drive them powerfully forward towards the desired outcome of the Learn table. They ended up choosing third grade reading scores, A, because the data was telling them that there was a significant percentage of kids in Erie who were below the proficiency level, but also because one of the committee members shared that they'd recently learned that third grade reading scores were used by the corporate prison industry in the U.S. as the most reliable predictors of how many prisons needed to be building a decade into the future. And that was such a shock and such an affront to the people of the Learn table that they decided that if it was good enough for the corporate prison industry, it was good enough for them too. So then, with that kind of alignment, they went deep, right? They really brought some rigor to looking at the data around the current state of third grade reading in Erie. They looked at what the literature was saying around promising programs and key initiatives to help increase third grade reading, and take a look at what they managed to achieve in just 3 short years. So when they started, 33% of their kids were below basic, 34% were proficient and advanced, and 33% were at the basic level. But at the end of 3 years, because of a coordinated effort that spanned way beyond schools, it engaged parents, grandparents, faith networks, the whole shebang, 75% of their third graders were reading at above grade level, 19 were at grade level, and only 6 were reading below the basic level. So this story for me really highlights one of the key elements of collective impact, right? And that is that while you hold a comprehensive view and a big picture and you try to explore it as holistically as possible, at the same time, ironically, what you have to do is actually focus in and choose how you are going to affect that complex issue, which is reflected in a combination of what the data is telling you, but also the passion, energy, and excitement of the folks that you've engaged in your initiative. And that there isn't always clearly one right answer, and there certainly isn't necessarily a wrong answer. So the fourth condition is continuous communication. So this is recognizing you're bringing together people from different sectors to work together in new ways. So you really need to be mindful of creating shared language, a common language across these diverse sectors, and that takes time. It's also about paying attention to the quality of the conversations that you have across these diverse groups when you bring them together. And it's mindful about how we tell the stories to one another about this work and how the folks engaged in a collective impact effort back to their own home communities or their own home organizations and help spread the word of what they're learning through this effort. So quick, great example, this is from my own work in the Headwaters region. And what we did, one of the early projects embraced by the group that I helped to found, Headwaters Communities in Action, was to champion the creation of a regional trails system. So over years, we've done many things, recognizing there wasn't one common map of the trails. We created an online version. But because our local trails relied so much on municipal support, and many municipal councillors were not necessarily trail users, we used a grant to buy trail counters, infrared trail counters, and that picture at the bottom is us learning how to install them. There was a joint effort with our local conservation authority, and we created a loan program where these infrared trail counters could be loaned to small voluntary trails over the course of a year. And then what we did was we collected the data from the various trail counters and put it into an infographic that we then took on a dog and pony show to every single local municipality in our region, really surprising people about the huge number of voters who were actively using the trails on an ongoing basis. So the fifth condition is the backbone infrastructure. So the purpose of the backbone infrastructure is really like the manager of a construction site, whose job it is to coordinate the work across the various trades to ensure that the overall project keeps moving forward on schedule and on time. Well, in a collective impact effort, you are not an organization, but you are choosing to work together across a multitude of partners. So, you will form action teams around key areas like they did in Erie together. And the job of the backbone is to really help create the kind of supporting infrastructure to enable each one of the working groups to get their work done and to build momentum and focus and clarity for the project overall. And the bullets there listed on the left are the 6 core roles that are the responsibility of the backbone infrastructure. There's been lots of misperceptions about the backbone. Lots of groups often wanting to embrace collective impact will proudly declare themselves unilaterally as a backbone because there's a perception that the backbone holds control and holds money. That is not solely true. Certainly the backbone organization, but so do the action areas as well of a collective impact effort. But it is the backbone role is that hold the collective impact effort together. So this quick picture gives you a sense of what governance looks like. It's a shared governance structure. So what you've got here is sort of a steering committee that's multi-sectoral with representation from various working groups on that leadership committee. And then you've got a very small staff that helps support the work of the steering committee and the effort as a whole. So quickly, some governance threads for you. You got to hold on to that big picture. You do need to negotiate some technical agreements between and amongst different players so that everything is clear. The trick with governance in a collaborative effort is you absolutely do not want to define your governance too soon, because the reality is the collective impact effort often will go through a few iterations before you firmly land on a common agenda. And if you move too quickly to solidify your governance structure, you may in fact find that it actually hems you in and is not ideally suited for where ultimately your common agenda takes you. So here's some quick overviews of roles, and we'll share this deck with you after so you can see how the different roles get played out in an effort. But I think I just want to wrap us up and move into the question period by reminding you that collective impact, while it is about the 3 preconditions and the 5 conditions, is actually way more than that as well. So, John Conyers, reflecting a little bit later on collective impact, sort of 3 or 4 years down the road, was saying in many ways he believes that the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact are necessary but not sufficient to really get to the full promise of what the collective impact framework offers. And that is an opportunity to work with new partners in new ways that challenge us to view what we've always done in new ways. And I just want to highlight for us quickly 3 of the really important mindset shifts that are implicit when one chooses to embrace collective impact as an approach. The first is really challenging who ought to be involved in an effort. So often, when we're starting to work on an issue, a lot of the players are the folks who've been around the issue for a while, and we all tend to know each other, and we start moving. And that's great, but collective impact is asking us to go beyond the familiar and to really challenge ourselves to say, who else in the community is affected by or impacted by this issue, either on a personal level or at a sector level, that might invite us to challenge ourselves to see this issue in a new perspective and ensure that those multiple perspectives are reflected not just at the steering committee level, but also at the working group level as well. The second mindset shift, implicit in collective impact, is really considering how we structure things to create new opportunities for people to work together differently. So it is around building across multiple perspectives a sense of common intent and purpose. It invites us to think, not only do we want the sector experts who know this issue well, but we want to invite in context experts, the people within your particular community who can help you to tailor what proven practices might suggest would be helpful in a way that makes sense for that unique community context. And that ultimately, you want to be designing how people work together in ways that, as my colleague Liz Weaver will often say, you need to go slow to go fast. So it's about inviting your multiple perspectives to slow down and question a lot of the way we've historically looked at an issue, with the goal that what we want to do is see, find a new way to see the issue that's reflective of the collective experience of the diversity around your table, challenge ourselves to learn, and then ultimately look at how we're framing this issue and maybe create new opportunities by framing it differently. And then finally, the third most important mindset shift in collective impact is encouraging us to move beyond thinking solely about programs to say, what are the system changes that we need to see happen? That when we're busy in our organizational realms delivering our programs, we never seem to get to. But we know that if we could change some of these systems, that it would sort of change the rules of the game, if you like. So oftentimes when we think of system strategies, we certainly think about policy, and that is certainly a lever. But let me just highlight quickly for you 4 kind of pathways to get to systems change. So the first and the early win in many collective impact efforts is that increasing coordination. So you remember the third condition, mutually reinforcing activities. You know, in choosing to work in this way, you create opportunities for people to see where the synergies are between different programs and initiatives in the community and where some of the gaps are and how to fill them. And so then the enhancing services kind of flows from that, right? So, you know, if there's a program or initiative, a gap that we collectively identify, how might we go about working together to fill it? Learning by prototyping is the third. So, you know, we give ourselves permission to create what I would call safe fail experiments. We give ourselves opportunities to try working together in new ways and try new ways of working to address the issue that unifies us together, and then ultimately looking at municipal, federal, provincial, and even organizational policies that can unintentionally create barriers to addressing the issue that we're all unified around. So just in closing, before I move us into our question period, a couple of things I just want to highlight. The first is, you know, for all that we've talked about the structure, and I think the real gift that Konya and Kramer have given to all of us in articulating so beautifully the 3 preconditions and 5 conditions of collective impact is the clarity and simplicity of the language. They convey a very complex way of working very powerfully and simply. However, the devil is in the details, right? So while the framework is beautiful in its comprehensiveness and clarity, how that translates to your issue in your own community will vary. And so it's really important that we take time to learn from other similar efforts, we accelerate each other's learning, and we go in knowing that we've got a plan, but we're forever having to adapt it as it unfolds. So I'm going to pause there and invite your comments, your questions, any insights you have. And this might either be about collective impact itself, or you may be looking forward to meeting up with us face-to-face in Halifax in a couple of weeks and may have some very specific questions about that as well. And all are welcome. So with that, I'm going to pause for a sec and invite everyone to do what you can, shout out your questions, and maybe Stephanie, if I can call on you to maybe kind of animate some of them and we'll work them through, that would be great.
Of course. We've already had a few questions trickling in. The first one comes from Mary Lou Levisky, and she's asking, do you find NGOs receiving, for example, municipal funding, reluctant to advocate but play games because they cannot be seen to be against, for example, the elimination of bedbugs and cockroaches in social housing?
Oh, Mary Lou, what a fabulous question. In fact, you know what, I think, you know what, the reality is sometimes it can be challenging for various partners at any time to be seen to be standing out on the forefront of a particular issue for lots of reasons. So, you know, you've certainly named NGOs, but I also know, for example, don't know how true it is in other jurisdictions, but often, for example, public health is funded through a local municipality. You know, and or, you know, if a new council comes in and there's certain, you know, changes in programming or investments made that have an impact, for example, on access to healthy food or that kind of thing, it can put those departments in an equally difficult position. But certainly, and I think the Halton Our Kids Network is a fabulous example of this, that, you know, one of the things that they recognize is that they have 6 anchor partners and a whole bunch of community partners. But their 6 anchor partners are their regional community services, their municipal public health unit, 2 different school boards, and the police and a developmental services organization. And in reflecting over the value of their network, one of the things that a number of their partners named is, you know, there are times when it isn't safe individually to speak out. But because over time, their collaborative effort, the Our Kids Network, has been perceived and appreciated as a fact-driven and, what would I say, neutral spokesperson of the common good that allows the network to sometimes speak out and challenge issues when individual partner agencies and organizations cannot. So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but it's, you know, we don't let go of our individual organizational identities, but actually the collective impact effort, the collaborative network, creates another table and another mechanism to give voice to those issues. Okay, is there another question?
Yeah,
or
we have
comment?
Yeah, we have 3 more questions lined up here. The next one coming from Lisa Seal Thompson. Can a collective impact approach be used on a smaller scale, collaborating across teams within the same organization?
Well, you know what, Lisa? I think for me, if I go back to the collaboration spectrum, I think the challenge for me would be if you were working within a single organization, my assumption is that you're all from the same sector. And so my definition, given that I believe working across sectors is so instrumental to tackling a collective impact approach, I would say, not knowing the nuances of your issue enough, that it's certainly possible to facilitate better coordination and cooperation across departments in an organization, but that would be a form of collaboration that for me wouldn't meet all the criteria of what would constitute collective impact. Does that make sense?
Great, thanks Sylvia. The next one coming from Erie Ibanez. Can you apply collective impact approach across multiple geographies simultaneously, so the same issue across multiple communities?
Absolutely you can. So a beautiful example of that actually is the Vibrant Communities Network that Tamarack is home to, and I'm sharing this example because it's the one that I'm most familiar with. So, you know, each of the Vibrant Communities roundtables on poverty reduction, and it began with 5, you know, trailblazing communities, 5 urban communities that were keen to bring different sectors together to have a fresh look at opportunities to reduce poverty and what did that look like in their 5 regions. So over time, that network grew to being 15 urban communities, and now it's well over 60 Vibrant Community Roundtables that meet regularly through the Vibrant Communities Network. And what's beautiful is they actually make time both on conference calls and webinars, but also face-to-face. They just had a hugely successful event in Edmonton, because what they're discovering is they can accelerate each other's journey by sharing wisdom. If one community tried a poverty reduction approach around accessible transportation and a new partner was about to try it, they could get some, some quick tips, advice, and resources from others that had worked that way before. And the other piece we start to see is that while each group is maybe working at their own community level on this issue, they are bumping up against the same issues and challenges because of provincial funding or provincial legislations, or perhaps there's opportunities at the federal level to make change. And the collaborative network then allows them to advance a shared policy agenda while they're individually doing the work of poverty reduction in their own local communities. So actually accelerates the impact overall and really starts to advance an agenda around systems change. Okay, any other questions?
Yes, we have 2 more questions. The next one coming from Deb Haynes. We find getting new stakeholders to the table is difficult. What have you found helpful?
I don't know that there's any one answer. I think there's a resource that I often use called the community referencing system. So what in that sort of tool or resource, you do a bit of a brainstorm at your leadership group around what is the sector or perspective that, or the sector or perspectives that you are wanting to invite to the table that you're having trouble attracting. And then between and amongst you all, begin to brainstorm who all do you know within that sector. And it may not be through a professional context. You may be hockey moms together and are sitting on the same freezing bench, 3 nights a week or something. So it's inviting all of the leaders to tap their own networks to help figure out who to draw in. Or, sometimes it's about hosting an initial focus group with that particular perspective and being clear about wanting to attract the perspective and what some of the issues and opportunities are around that. And I know oftentimes this shows up, particularly when we're trying to invite citizen perspective to the table. And, there was a fabulous learning that my colleagues shared from the Hamilton Roundtable, where they were committed to having 25% of the participants be folks with lived experience of poverty. And despite all of their attempts, they would attract people and they'd stay for maybe a meeting or 2. So after some brainstorming, they put in place all of the things that they thought would have alleviated some of the barriers. So, childcare and honorariums for transportation but still the same dynamic was happening. So they really brought it up and started having the conversations about what is this about. And one of the big revelations and ahas was one of the folks with lived experience of poverty said, you all come to this table, the rest of you, from different organizations. So you have your mission, you have your vision, and you have a team of folks behind you where if you come to our table and you personally don't know the answer, you've got a constituency group that you can go back to and you can ask, and so you don't feel so out there by yourself. And she said, listen, I am a single mom in poverty. And I know enough to know that my experience of poverty is not the experience of poverty, meaning I have a newcomer senior neighbor who lives down the way from me. His experience of poverty is completely different from my own. And so I feel inauthentic, right? Speaking as though I'm the expert on poverty when I only know my own personal reality, and I know enough to know that that may not be representative enough. So that was a real aha, and what they found, at least in this situation, was part of the solution that worked, was they started hosting a weekly coffee group where folks with lived experience of poverty could all meet up regularly and share their stories. And as they began to share stories with one another, they started to recognize some common patterns and themes that transcended their individual experience. And then spokespersons from that coffee group were then kind of recruited into various work tables at the round table for poverty reduction, and they had more confidence because they could go back if they didn't have an immediate answer and get advice and support from others. So that's another example I can give you around, it's not just the bringing people on, and I know that that can be a challenge, but it's also the retaining those various perspectives, right? Once you get them there, and both are important. Okay, I think, do we have time for any other questions, or we're just about out of time, eh?
Yeah, I think we're just about out of time. There's actually one last comment, not a question, from Brenda Taylor, who I think encompasses the wrap-up of this webinar well. She says, 3 points I would like to emphasize. Pay attention to communication infrastructure, facilitating collective conversations and collaboration. 2, be aware of the iron triangle composed of backbone representation, bureaucracy, and decision makers. The challenge is a closed representation of the issues. And 3, letting vision and mission statements be the guide. What can occur when funding is coming from governments and other NGOs is that the focus of the recipient organization can change. So I think that...
Wow, Brenda, that's beautiful. Really love that advice and wisdom. I have a sense it was probably hard won. Well, I look forward to meeting, I hope, many, if not all of you, in Halifax in a couple of weeks, and really appreciate you joining us on this call today.